Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between Michael K Vaughan and myself, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we've wasted our youths. And it's Mike's show. I barged my way in on his tour of his epic collections a long time ago, so he gets to pick what we talk about. He came up with a humdinger of an idea for today. I swear, he's an endless font of humdinger of ideas. If I didn't have creative people to steal from and lean off, I don't know what I would do. But he came up with an idea today that is very appealingly formless. He suggested that he do a video on the top 10 comics issues of a type of comic that I would never do a top 10 for. And he suggested that I do likewise. He gave me his suggestion for what I should do, which is Superboy. The Adventures of Superman when he was a boy. And he didn't tell me what he was doing. And as of making this video, I have not yet seen if he's posted his video for today. I have a prediction. Mike's taste in comics is reputedly deplorable, except when it precisely coincides with my own. And left to his own devices, I fear the worst. I am going to guess. If I had to guess what he's going to pick today, I would think that it would be probably Swamp Thing. Oh, it could be even worse. I mean, some of the stuff that he has $100 anthologies for, it just staggers the imagination. Not a Kryptonian to be seen. But I'll have to watch it. I'm sure that I will love it, no matter what. I'm sure that I will. And I certainly can do a video just worshiping Superboy. But I originally had a qualm about this when he brought it up to me. And then I thought, no, I can do this. But the more I've thought about it, the more I think that my original reservation was correct. Because in order to do a top 10 stories list for anything, you need there to be good and bad stories. You need, in other words, everybody say it together, the Stan Lee virus. You need unevenness. And the comics that I loved when I was a wee bairn, the comics that I fell in love with and was first imprinted on, don't have that. I know that's going to seem totally alien to modern comics readers, to post-Marvel Comics Stan Lee comic book readers. But once upon a time, comic book superheroes did not have story arcs. They did not have highs and lows, and they did not have distinct personalities. And that was a good thing. All of those were good things. And that's when Superboy flourished. Superboy was an idea that was dreamed up. Well, we've got this character Superman, the greatest superhero of them all. What if he put on a costume early? What if he didn't just become Superman when he was an adult in Metropolis? What if he was a costume superhero as a teenager or as a little boy? It was tried out in a comic book, and fans responded really well. Fans really liked the idea. So Superboy became a regular feature in Adventure Comics, which was, at the time, most comics were anthology comics. You got a couple of issues of the main headliner. You got a couple of backup stories from secondary heroes like Green Arrow or Aquaman or The Shining Knight or whatnot. And you got your money's worth. You paid 10 cents for it, and you got your money's worth. And Superboy was really popular there. One great story after another, but they were all great. They were all the same kind of story. Superboy has an adventure in Smallville. The real Superboy is Clark Kent when he was a teenager in the American Midwest, putting on his costume as Superboy, becoming world famous, intergalactically famous. But not anything else. That character, that name, the name Superboy has been mapped over a whole bunch of things. It has appeared everywhere. In fact, before we dig into my version of the best Superboy stories, I wanted to show you some of the things that Superboy is not. Just to clarify things. Like, for instance, there's this. That is two teenage delinquents wearing a Batman and a Superman costume and tearing apart a public poster of Superman and Batman. This is a great Nick Cardy cover. And that is the story. The story is the Super Sons, who are, in this story, the children of Superman and Batman. Superman Jr. is never called Superboy in this story, but Superman Jr. has only a tiny amount of Superman's powers. He was told in the issue that he has half of Superman's powers, but he doesn't, because at this time Superman's powers were infinite. And half of infinity is infinity. Yet, this Superman Jr., although he is super strong, he's not infinitely strong. He's bulletproof, but bullets raise big bruises on his body, and a bursting shell can definitely stun him, and one of the sufficient power probably could kill him. He can't fly, either. He can jump 100 miles at a time, but he can't fly. And Batman Jr. is a louche, wasteful teen with long hair who hates the sunlight because he's out partying all night. And in this issue, when they are being, this is of course from ye olden days, they are being ragged on by their parents who just don't get us, man. They just aren't hep to the jive we're laying down. They're smacked upside by the generation gap. Do any of you remember when we took the term generation gap seriously? And Superman and Batman know that they're having these qualms because, of course, Batman has bugged his son's clothing, of course. Wouldn't any father do that? So they decide to set up an experiment in this issue. One of the wackiest ideas, I think this is Elliot Magan, Bob Haney. One of the weirdest ideas that Bob Haney ever came up with. Superman and Batman decide to create an alternate reality that the sons can prove themselves in. And Superman does this in our world. He takes a gigantic swack of the ocean floor and bullwhips it forward at such speed that it causes a vibrational dimension to form. And this is an exact duplicate of the city that Superman was outside of when he did this, but it's not that city. But everyone in it is the same. So Superman can create realities. And the super sons don't think anything of it. They don't know that it's an alternate reality. They just want to go here to prove themselves. They want to take on some crime of their own. They're on an Easy Rider hog. All of these references are going to go right past you if you don't remember the 70s, you're not going to remember any of these things. They see that organized crime is plaguing the city, and while they're driving through an alley, they change into their costumes. I want to point out, as one reader from the American Midwest wrote an intemperate letter that appears in the next issue of World's Finest, saying, "Great story, but no matter how superpowered you are, it is not possible to change costumes into leotards on a moving bicycle. On a moving motorcycle, that is not possible to do no matter what kind of superpowers you have. You have to get off the motorcycle to change into your costume. You can't do it in an alley on the motorcycle, much less in a few seconds." But I want to point... Oh, look at that. I just glimpsed it here. Wall posters. Boy, oh boy. I wonder what those fetch for. Did anybody even think to keep them in mint condition to sell them on eBay? We're not talking about this Superboy, even though he's never called Superboy. And we're not talking about this Superboy either. This is Superboy saying, "I'll protect you, Lana." And it's Bizarro Superboy, and he's saying, "But Emmett Art?" And the reason that Lana looks so strange is because this is a comic book companion to the TV show. There was a live-action TV show called The Adventures of Superboy that had a star, John Hames Newton, and then John Hames Newton was pulled over for excessive speed and DUI one too many times, so he was replaced by Jerry Christopher, who also played Superboy in this show. And I have very fond memories of the show. It ended up being much better than I ever thought it would be, mainly due to two things. Thing number one, they got a fantastic actor. They brought in Sherman Howard to play Lex Luthor. And thing number two, they decided to get real writers for the show instead of just studio hacks for the first season. They got real comic book writers to come into the show. So the thing ended up being really good. But it naturally sparked a comic. And the comic is weird. It's definitely, I would assume, outside of any kind of continuity. Not that anyone cares about Superboy continuity anymore. But I would assume that it's completely out of that continuity. It's meant mainly to reflect the reality of the TV show. So we're not talking about that Superboy either. And some of you may remember one of the best-selling comic book gimmicks of all time, the death of Superman. and then the Reign of Superman, where Superman seems to be dead, and 4 claimants come to Metropolis, all claiming to be him or to carry on his legacy in one way. And one of those is a boy in a leather jacket who absolutely insists that you call him Superman. Don't you dare call him Superboy. But eventually it turns out that Superman is still alive, and he can't have that name, and he's a boy anyway. So he agrees to be called Superboy, and his origin story seems to be that he was cloned. An imperfect clone of Superman. At one point, I think the idea was floated that his 2 daddies were Superman and Lex Luthor. But he doesn't have Superman's powers. The original story of this clone Superboy is that Superman's DNA, although Cadmus Labs in Metropolis has a sample of it, it's too alien, it's too complex for them to duplicate. So instead, they give this clone Superboy something called tactile telekinesis. Pretty good workaround. He has a kind of ambient energy field around his body, directly around his body, that he can manipulate, and that works to some degree autonomously. So, for instance, he doesn't have to tell it to repel bullets. Even if you fire at him from behind, the bullet's still going to bounce off this personal energy field that's so close to him that it makes it look like it's bouncing off him. He can control the energy field, so he can fly. He can command it to fly him through the air and whatnot. It has some weaknesses, of course, as the artists and writers knew right away. Of course, such a thing would probably be vulnerable to fire or temperature of any kind. It would make him much less powerful than a Kryptonian. But he caught on with fans. Once Superman was back, all of the substitute Superman characters caught on with fans to one degree or another. And this Superboy was duly given his own comic book. This comic book. And that is our character with his doo-wop hair and his leather jacket and whatnot. This comic is terrific. This comic, for the whole of its run, was terrific. Here we get fantastic artwork here, and we get a description of what his powers are like. And this Superboy, he had a long run in this comic. I loved it. You wouldn't think that I would, because I am the world's biggest fan of the real Superboy, but I love this anyway. It was just done with so much humor, and the artwork was always great. It started off with Tom Grummett, and then it moved on to Raymond Bernardo, who's also great here, and who also did Justice League Task Force. This character goes on, and he's interesting. Never anything other than interesting. And at one point in his continuity, a time anomaly shunts him forward to the 30th century, which of course was introduced in the original Superboy's Adventure comics as a time when the Legion of Superheroes, a future superhero team, loves the memory of Superboy. They love his memory so much that they go back in time to induct him into their club. In this particular continuity, that never happened. Clark Kent becomes Superman when he goes to Metropolis, so he's never Superboy. And yet, when this character shows up, this clone Superboy, who's not Superman when he was a boy, when he shows up in the 30th century, he's wearing the Superman crest, and he starts to dress in a Superboy costume in the 30th century. He thinks he's stranded there forever. So why not be Superboy for this Legion, even though he's not Kryptonian and doesn't have those powers? And we get a revived Adventure Comics with... once upon a time in small town Iowa, that particular Superboy would have caused continuity disruptions all his own, so to speak. But this is still the same character, and we're not talking about this Superboy either. And then in another continuity shakeup, because when we're talking about DC Comics, we have to talk about stupid continuity shakeups. In another continuity shakeup, which we talked about last time, there was something called the New 52. Which introduced a new Superman, an a-hole Superman, a Superman who floats above the ground when he talks to you, has a popped Nehru collar, and doesn't care about truth, justice, and the American way, just cares about himself and his brooding problems. And that Superman, like the post-crisis Superman, was never Superboy. And fans hated it, of course. Fans hated, except for hipsters. Most comic book fans couldn't stand the New 52 and just wanted it to be over. What is this? You give us this as an alternative to the real versions of these characters, we might buy it. The way Marvel did with their Ultimates line. We're not canceling the Avengers, but we're giving you another version. We're not canceling the Amazing Spider-Man, but we'll give you an Ultimate Spider-Man in case you want to read about it. And fans did. But if you say, no, this is the version that you're getting and no other, not the one you grew up with, well, screw that. So fans didn't like it, and they were pretty vocal about it, and they were vocal about one thing more than anything else, which is this Superman has got to go. We want our Superman back, the real Superman back. And so the writers brought the real Superman back. Some sort of pocket reality get-out-of-jail loophole where this Superman still exists, and he is still in love with Lois Lane, and they have had a son. Clark Kent and Lois, we actually see the birth. It's in the Batcave. So Clark Kent and Lois Lane have a son. And gradually, while Superman is clandestinely helping the world because he's wearing a black costume, he knows that there is a Superman in this world, in this new reality, but he can't help himself from helping people anyway. He's just going to do it on the down low. So the new a-hole Justice League will not know that he exists. The new a-hole Superman will not know that he exists. He will operate in the shadows, but he will still do good. And he will keep all of this from his little boy while his little boy is growing up. Until the little boy learns. Look at that cover. I would take that for a poster. What a great cover. The little boy learns that his dad is Superman. Not the weird Superman, the a-hole Superman, who doesn't have a spit curl and doesn't care about fighting evil. Not him. My dad is a better version of Superman. And at the end, this is Lois and Clark number 8. I wish I had these. I'm pretty sure this Lois and Clark miniseries is collected, but I don't have it. It's Ron Garney artwork. It's just fantastic. Or is it Ron Garney? No, I think it's Lee Weeks. Yeah, it's Lee Weeks artwork. See, Superman is helping the world in secret. And at the end of this particular issue, which I think is the last issue in this series, I think it went from 1 to 8. Their little son, Jonathan, learns that he can fly. And they... Isn't that awesome? My God, I in a million years would never have thought that Superman and Lois Lane as parents would work, and it worked perfectly. And they actually, I informally call him Superboy, the little boy. And he went on, of course, to become Superboy in real life, in the comics. He is introduced into the comics, and then you can mark time on the calendar. Then the DC creative bullpen was overtaken by ideological zealots, by Twitter people. And they decided that they need heads on walls. They need trophies. And the number one thing they wanted is that Superman has to be gay. But there are hard live wire lines in Marvel and DC that even zealots who are going to threaten you, they're going to threaten your kids, they're going to get you fired from your day job, even they can't cross those lines. The money people on the C-suite will say no and will fire you. They could not. You don't know where they live, and they couldn't care less whether you like them or not. They're not on Twitter. The money people said, you can't touch Superman, and you can't touch Batman, and you can't touch Wonder Woman. And so these ideologues took that innocent little boy, Jonathan Kent, and created a stupid comic book story in which he goes off into space with a man he doesn't know and is aged up to a teenager. They did this specifically so that they could say that he could come back to Earth, take the name of Superman, and they could make him gay. So that they could say to their partisans who don't read comics and don't know what a flimsy contrivance this is, we made Superman gay. You didn't. Clark Kent is not gay. But we jury-rigged a character, called him Superman, and made that character flagrantly gay. Just insultingly, stereotypically gay. I won't raise complicated sociological or political questions here, but I don't really know why this was necessary. The blue-haired activists who aged up Jonathan Kent to a teenager so that they could say that he was gay spent all day on Twitter saying that little children know their sexuality. They didn't have the courage of their convictions when it came to doing this, so instead they give us a teenage Superboy who is gay. He's not called Superboy because they want to call him Superman. I'm not talking about him either. And there have been a handful of other claimants, including a Superboy who turns evil and has been well used, but also badly used in a couple of major storylines. No, instead, I'm talking about this Superboy. The real Superboy. The Superboy from the 40s and the 50s, and even later. This Superboy, who had all sorts of adventures. He was in Adventure Comics, and he did really well, so he spun off into his own comic with a Superboy number 1. You didn't get many number 1s when that happened. That was extremely rare. For a character to get his own comic book, not to be in an anthology where anything could break out and where people could have their favorites, but instead his own book. That was very rare. I don't know how many times it had happened before Superboy #1, but it can't have been that many. And this comic took off as well. Superboy was a hit in Adventure and Superboy. And this brings us to the problem of this video, which is that I can't really nominate best stories. I mean, this is the headline story here is that Superboy discovers that the kindly Kents, who adopted him as a baby from a rocket ship from Krypton, before they did that, adopted another super baby, Mito. Only he turned out to be a lout, a delinquent. He turned out to be not a good kid. And it wasn't a mistake. It's not a fantasy. They really did do this. Superboy meets Mito, and they fight. Mito is a bad apple. He's still not any better. The Kents end up in this storyline, I can't help but think with a terrified tone in their voice. They end up hugging Superboy and looking at a portrait of Mito when he was their golden apple before Superboy showed up and saying, "We'll keep this drawing of Mito in your secret trophy room, Superboy." Why would you call him Superboy when you're in private? Too bad he became villainous. We loved him very much when he was a child. And then Pa Kent very hastily says, "But not as much as you, son." There's that story, but Superboy also became the home of Super Baby. We're the tiny little baby, but you didn't get just Super Baby. You got lots of, like, what's another one? The Toughest Kid in Smallville is a backup story here. And that story is, here you get it again, that story is what happens if Superboy became a delinquent? What happens if he started to become a kind of a punk? You get these classic Kurt Swan covers, but you get all sorts of other things too. I mean, Superboy is clobbered by the fists of fury. They're disembodied fists in the air, and Lana Lang is very concerned. Okay, fine. You get this cover. What's it going to be? What's the story going to be? How are you going to explain that? Once again, you certainly couldn't do this today, but all these comics are selling guns to kids. but what's that story going to be? Superboy is being pounded by fists. And the whole point of the story is that you just figure out what happened. Here, another Superboy, another super being. He has superpowers. Sometimes, some of them seem even greater than Superboy. He's not vulnerable to kryptonite, for instance. What's going to happen to him? Are there going to be two superpowered people in the world? Because keep in mind, when Superboy was in these issues, these take place in the past. Before, there was a comic book artist named Frank Robbins, and he was also a writer, and he took over writing Superboy in 1970 or 1970s, when all of a sudden it wasn't cool anymore to have no credits in a comic. All of a sudden you felt like the readers needed to know who was writing this. Stan Lee virus taking its effect there, so that you need to credit the artist and you need to credit the writer. And when those things started, when Superboy started to slowly be dragged into the real world, well, then you would get signifiers of when this was all happening. We're going to see some of those later issues. The president is Franklin Roosevelt. But either way, whether you date it or not, the idea here is that Superman is 33 years old and he's in Metropolis. So this is when he was a teenager. This is at least 15 years ago, maybe more. And the assumption in most Superboy adventures, whether it's Superboy or Adventure Comics, is that he's the only superpowered being on Earth. Maybe Aquaman might be a boy at about this time. Maybe there might be visitors who have superpowers and come from other worlds, but probably not. Probably it's a hoax or it's temporary. See, we have another case of Superman being a delinquent. Superboy being a delinquent. This was in the this is Superboy number 134, and this came out in 1966, and all through the 60s, delinquency. Are you a slick-haired, sock hop attending, switchblade wearing delinquent? It comes up over and over again in Superboy and Adventure Comics. That what would happen if Superboy were a delinquent? You get that theme over and over again here. Look at this. Clark Kent is pulling his shirt open, but it's not his usual costume. And who's this kid? He seems rather insouciant, doesn't he? What is going to explain this cover? Okay, well, that will be your job as a writer. You explain this cover, you illustrate it, you throw in a few monsters, maybe an erupting volcano. Smallville has it all. And then you wrap everything up. Exactly as you started it. There's nothing changed. There's nothing different. It's the same as it was in the last issue. But then we move into the 70s, and the story started to get authors, and they started to get artist credits, and they started to have all sorts of angst and meaning. There was an upside. Neil Adams, the great Neil Adams, did a lot of these covers. And a lot of his covers are just fantastic. Just amazingly good. So that you know, again, it's the same thing. It's the story, I killed Lana Lang. Look at that cover. It's the same thing in that you look at the cover and you wonder, okay, well, what will explain this? I'm not looking for an arc. I'm not looking for an existential crisis. I just want to know what explains the cover. That's all. What is that creature? And what does that mean? Well, these people being sucked into this purple bubble gum. What is going on here? What is that cover? That's all I want to know. And I would put all of these issues in a best of Superboy anthology. Look at this one. The Day It Rained Superboys. Look at that Neil Adams cover. How amazing. And then probably his best one. This is from well into 1969. Oh my God. World was about to go to heck in a handbasket. This is Superboy number 160. Probably the best Neil Adams cover. Sorry for the condition. This has been read a million times. But at this point, you were getting artist credits, you were getting author credits, and things were starting to get all kinds of hectic. All kinds of hep and heavy, man. That culminated in, what is the date on this thing? 1977. That culminated in this thing, which I remember in 1977, this was heck to get. I remember this being complicated to get. I don't think my newsstand had this. I think I had to go somewhere else to get this, but it might not sound like anything to you, but nobody drove, and you got your comics and everything else in one place. You got it in one place. You didn't go somewhere else for it. But this story is Superboy's solo adventure. It's called The Final Test, and the title of it is Don't Call Me Superboy. Classic Kurt Swan artwork. And see, here you've got Superboy at all of his different stages. There's Super Baby. Superboy, when he first appeared in that before Adventure Comics, he appears. He's a little boy. He's like 8 or 9 years old. Then he gets to be a teenager, but now we're being told, look at this lusty adult. We're being told, don't call me Superboy. And in the course of the story, because it's the 1970s, because it's the era of In Search Of, the story involves not only flying saucers, but Bigfoot. And in the course of the story, something happens to Superboy that makes him insist that you don't call him Superboy anymore, that you call him Superman. Now, in the comics history before this, the blissful 50 years before this, that something was that he moves to Metropolis. And that he's grown up now. So he's in Metropolis, he's not in Smallville anymore, so he's going to be Superman. But in this story, in 1977, that's not the thing that makes him decide that he's now a man. I will not soil this channel with the details, but I will give you a little bit of humor. Whose humor am I doing here? Carrie Bates. Shame on you, Carrie Bates. We get this. A young woman who discovers that, tells Clark Kent, you are Superboy, I know this, I figured it out. And then the next morning in the Kent kitchen, we see the Kents at the table together. And Ma Kent says, Clark's bed is still made. I wish he wouldn't go out on all these all-night patrols. And Pa Kent says, a Superboy's work is never done, Martha. I'm sure he had more than enough to keep his hands full. Don't call me Superboy. I am now Superman. Nevertheless, the comic, DC did try to bring the character back in the 80s for a bit. Tried to bring the character back. And then something happened, and maybe one of you can tell me, because I've never had a clear idea of what that something is. Does it have something to do with the TV show that I mentioned? At some point, DC Comics absolutely stopped having anything to do with the adventures of Superman when he was a boy, with my Superboy. All of a sudden, DC Comics stopped having anything to do with this character. They invented other characters, other kinds of Superboy, as we've seen, but uh, we didn't have this anymore. And these have never been collected. This is a gigantic anthology. Mike's original assignment here was your top 10 stories. My whole point is any 10 of these stories would be my top 10 stories, and you could pick from hundreds of them. What I wouldn't give for a 1,000-page hardcover omnibus of Superboy. This Superboy, not some other Superboy, not any of the other Superboys, just this one. There's so many stories out here. From a decade-long run on Superboy, a decade-long run on the Adventure Comics, what I wouldn't give. For a huge 1,000-page hardcover omnibus, I would buy it, of Superboy, and then another one of Adventure Comics. But no. No. And I can't help but think, since the rejection is so ironclad, I can't help but think that it's legal. That there's a legal reason for this. And I'd love to know what it is. I can't remember if I've ever researched it or not, but maybe one of you knows off the top of your head. Why doesn't DC Comics... the reason DC Comics doesn't publish an ongoing story of the adventures of Superman when he was a boy is because the continuity has been revamped 20 times since then. So who knows if there ever was a Superboy in the current continuity. I have no idea, and I don't care. But once upon a time, a comic like that would have sold. In fact, it would sell more now, I would think, than before. For nostalgia's sake, because the only people who are buying current comic books these days are people who remember when they were good. There must be a reason why DC doesn't do this anymore, apart from just the continuity revamps. They could certainly reprint these older issues, whether they've revamped their continuity for Superboy or not. They could reprint these earlier issues, and they don't. So why don't they? I'd love to know. But in the meantime, it's a quixotic task to pick my 10 favorite Superboy stories. I would say, if you're interested, since I don't have a book to show you, I'm sure that whatever Mike is going to propose in his video today, there'll be a book, or more than one, that he'll hold up to show you. For me, all I can say is, I don't know if this stuff is available on Comixology, or maybe that's covered by whatever lawsuit we might be talking about. Somehow or other, in a flea market or a back issue sale or whatever, find some of these earlier issues, any of them, from the 1950s and the 1940s, of Superboy or Adventure Comics. Find any of them. You're going to find wonderful, innocent stories that you're going to love. Any 10 will do. The whole point of the pre-Stan Lee world of comic books is that any 10 will do. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, and I'm going to go see what Michael K. Vaughan picks for his video. Is it Sergeant Rock? Is it Starbrand? I don't know. I don't know. Is it the Madripoor Wolverine? I will look and see. I'm sure I will enjoy it. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. I know that Hannah always wants these comic books to go long, these videos, but I think 30 minutes is long enough. So I'll wrap this video up, and I'll be back. Thank you.